Hello, everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himvar. And today, also, it looks like I got beat up, but I was just sitting on like this. So don't worry. But I haven't done a fantasy essays video in a minute. So the last one I did was one by Gary Gygax, more of an ad. Wasn't very popular. Not a very popular video I did, which is half the videos I do aren't very popular. So not like I'm surprised, but this is a series of videos I talk about a fantasy essay. Generally, there's something written by fantasy authors. Almost all of them have been, right? I've looked at stuff by Michael Moorcock, by D.J. Butler, by H.P. Lovecraft, um, by Brian Murphy, by Stephen R. Donaldson, by Stephen Erickson. A good amount, right? I've done about 16 or something like that. I didn't look at my playlist before coming here. But today I wanted to do one, but I think calling it a fantasy essay would be a little too inaccurate for me. So maybe we call it a sci-fi essay, a science fiction essay. And there's a good thing actually, because there's a good number of them in this place that I read this. So this is the Epic of Space by the one and only E. Doc Smith, or Doc Smith is probably just Doc. I don't know. He's considered the father of space opera for those unaware. I believe it was in the 1960s, sometime in there, when they had like the only time they ever did a Hugo Award for best all-time series. Foundation won, but Lensman got second. Lensman is Doc Smith's like his baby, I guess. I actually have a bunch of the right here, but I don't remember if these are. I don't know where the first one is. um, my pal Jerry got me a bunch of these, but anyways, here's a Lensman. I don't know. Galactic Patrol. I think this is actually originally the first one, so it's number 3 when the series was reworked. I think it started getting published in the 20s. So old pulp stuff. I haven't read Galactic Patrol actually. I've only read one book by Smith. This Smith, I should say. I've only read one thing by Corvainer Smith. I've read several things by Clark Ashton Smith. But this is an essay you can find in Of Worlds Beyond. It was 1947, which is when it was originally published. It was edited by Lloyd Arthur Eschbach. And it has essays from a bunch of different science fiction authors, and they're mostly on writing science fiction, and really, and that's kind of what this essay is on as well, the Epic of Space, right? Which is, I guess, the idea, right, that's what space opera is, because, I mean, if that's what Smith is writing, his father's space opera, then I guess it's the Epic of Space, which makes sense. That's essentially true. I think everyone would agree with that. If we have epic fantasy on one end, the sci-fi equivalent would be space opera, normally, right? So he opens this, actually. It's very short, by the way. He opens this, but he says pretty much the authors he likes to read. He likes to read Campbell, DeCamp, Heinlein, Leinster, Lovecraft, Merritt, Morse, Starzl, I'm not sure how to say his name, Taine, I assume is how you say it, Van Vogt, Weinbaum, and Williamson. I haven't read all these authors. In some ways that's a crime. I don't even know who Taine and Starzl are, but I definitely have read Heinlein and Leinster, Lovecraft. I have not read Merritt. Definitely read Moore. Big fan of Moore. And Van Vogt and stuff like that. So, and I have plans to read all these guys I haven't read. Like DeCamp. I don't know how I haven't read DeCamp, actually, or Moore, or no, Merritt for that matter. And Camp and Weinbaum and Williamson. I have plans, but again, that's who he likes, right? And he pretty much says this is, in fact, this is what he says. He's like, they cover the field of fantastic fiction from pure weird to pure science fiction, right? Lovecraft, we generally say, is more weird. You can label some of the stories sci-fi, though. While they differ, while very different, each from all the others, they have many things in common, two of which are of interest here. First, they all put themselves into their work. Second, each writes or wrote between the lines, so that one reading is not enough to discover what is really there, right? So then we get in this first thing, that the what is really there thing. And he says you need at least 2 readings to get what is really there, preferably more, like 3 or 4 readings. You read the same thing 3 or 4 times to get it all, right? To really study this. And that kind of comes up later in this as well. And then he goes on to explain with a specific example, right? He mentions Merritt. He mentions all of his works by Merritt. And he says a 10-year-old child can read them and thrill at the exciting, adventurous surface stories. A poet can read them over and over for their feeling and imagery. A philologist, I like him because he says the word philologist here, which is 1940s, so more common back then, can study them for their perfection of wording and phraseology. And yet, underlying each of them, there is a bedrock foundation of philosophy, the magnificence of which simply cannot be absorbed at one sitting, and I guess at just reading the story one time. Now, also, when he says one sitting, a lot of these stories are shorter back then. His stories are actually supposed to be longer compared to some, but short stories are kind of the norm at this point, still, even in 47. And so he basically explains then what would only count one reading, essentially. And that's pretty much just action stories, stories that just have action, a lot of action. They're not worth reading again. And I can agree with that. I mean, like, and also when I read stories that have a lot of action, if it's just so much and I know what's going to happen anyways, I skip action. Sometimes I will admit that. But if it's just an action story, you can't read it twice. But what else, right? So character growth is needed, because if you have a flat character, he says this may limit how many books or stories you can have in a series for this character, because essentially, if your character starts here and it gets where you need him to go, that's pretty much the end of the line, right? You don't want to overdo it. And so having a flat character lets you write more about that character. And he's getting on some more other pulp stories at the time. He doesn't share any specifics, but he does say that a lot of people like to do that. And he also says background material and atmosphere is also something that you need for something that you want to be able to read multiple times. And I can understand this, right? Because I write for a few reasons. He gets into the writing part of it as well. But it'd be nice if it's a story you could read multiple times. Not necessarily that you'd want to. I don't read most things multiple times. You know what I mean? But that there is the potential for multiple times, right? Like for example, I don't ever rewatch Marvel movies. I hope that doesn't offend anyone. I don't ever rewatch Marvel movies, right? I could never see myself rereading an R.A. Salvatore book. I know that he tries to put philosophy in those books, but it's worthless philosophy pretty much. It's pretty much as bland as the fighting. So no reason for me to reread that. And so then he gets into the writing stuff, though. It's like, so what an author likes specifically is not always what an editor likes. If it's not liked by the latter, the story will never be published, right? It won't be read by anyone. That's not necessarily true these days. It's decently easy to self-publish something. Now, to get readers when you're self-publishing things isn't always guaranteed, but that's also not guaranteed when it's traditionally published either. Especially with how the market is. Back then, the fandom, I guess, if we were to put capital F, fandom was more cohesive, kind of more one unit. It's very split these days. So anyways, and he also says that this character stuff will slow down action, but it's worth it pretty much. This is one thing I think you can go too much into. For example, and people are probably going to crucify me for this, every Robin Hobb book I've read, and I've read 3, she slows it down too much. She goes too much in the character to the point where I don't care, because I don't care for her characters, and she's trying to make me care for them. Now, that's not always the case, right? For example, I've read The Wooden Sword by Lynn Abbey, which slows down a lot of the action as well for character, but she works much better with it. For me, the characters work much better. I really was engrossed in The Wooden Sword and its sequel, Beneath the Web, much more than I have been in any of the Robin Hobb stuff I've read. Because it worked. But I feel like that's something you have to beware. And it works, obviously, for a lot of people. In the case of Robin Hobb, obviously, she's quite popular. I just have an unpopular opinion there. And then he says, I do not believe that any author writes words merely to fill up space. He uses words just as a mechanic uses tools, or as an artist uses colors and brushes, and with just as definite an aim in view, right? And so, but he also says right after this that some authors aren't as good as the others. So just like some mechanics are better than other mechanics, some artists are better than other artists. And it's not all... and I would agree with him there as well. I don't really see much of an argument to be made there. So just like I would say, let Lynn Abbey, yeah, she's using her words and it works, I think. And I think maybe she's a better mechanic than Robin Hobb is. Anyways, he says also the one thing he gets in with kind of like complaints, basically like, oh, you have like a prototype ship showing up a lot. And let's say the hero gets on it to steal it really quickly to make a getaway or whatever. Is like there would be just about as much of a chance of a beautiful woman stowing away aboard it as there would be a case of a 500-mile racer at Indianapolis. So pretty much saying it happens all the time back in his day that there's this woman, which he does say also that like the guy shouldn't always get the girl. Only the guy should get the girl in the story if it works. And I guess that's pretty typical back then, anyways. It still happens though, I guess as well. Though the trope of the guy getting the girl is not maybe as inherent today, but he sees this idea as atrocious and lazy, right? This comparison, you would never find a stowaway woman in a NASCAR car, right, at Indianapolis. So, and that's a fair comparison, I guess. It's kind of funny. But then he gets into a section kind of going in the science of lensmen, right? Kind of like the speed of light really not being allowed by science. Pretty much, he does say technically there's some wiggle room, but not much really. But he does say this, and I think this is maybe something important for defining space opera. And he says the more highly improbable a concept is, short of being contrary to mathematics, whose fundamental operations involve no neglect of infinitesimals, the better I like it. So the more highly unlikely it is, but still allowed, the better it is. And I feel like that's a pretty peak space opera. There's a lot of really cool stuff in space opera, which is why a lot of people like reading it. I think it's just got great imaginary and fantastic things, stories of wonder and amazement. I guess whatever. And then he also mentioned briefly, for example, the hardest thing for him in writing actually is the motivation to write. Which is good to know. And this is how he leads it actually. In conclusion, if you want to write a space epic, go to it. This is the way I do it, right? The stuff he's just talked about, right? Wow, I can't speak English. Remuneration, sorry, tired, per hour does not compare with what a bricklayer earns, and it's harder work. I have done them both, and no. However, I get a terrific kick out of writing, especially out of the fact that quite a good many people really like my stuff. And I can understand that, right? Like he likes writing, and it's understandable that you would like that people like what you write. That's great. I mean, I think there's enjoyment in writing for writing's sake, but it's also enjoyment. You want people to like it, obviously. You don't want to put it out there and no one read it, or the people who read it did not like it. So, I mean, it would come off very personal in that sense. But anyways, that's just a video. I don't have like a NASA shirt, or else I'd wear that or something, right? That feels more appropriate. I didn't put on my suit coat because I don't feel educated enough in the science stuff. Though I read decent amount of science fiction here, so felt like this would work here, even for if it's a fantasy series. So, anyways, Liam from Liam's Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.